Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have another episode dedicated to training. The topic is something that Dr. Helms mentioned briefly during his interview. He said that for the purpose of muscle growth, you need to do a certain number of sets per body part per week. However, not every set is created equal. For a set to be effective at building muscle, at stimulating hypertrophy, you need to exert a certain intensity of effort. So that's today's topic. What is intensity of effort? How do you know that you're training hard enough? And how can you track your intensity of effort workout to workout? I also recently released a full blog article on the same topic, and it's titled, How Do You Know You're Training Hard Enough? And as always, you'll find the link in the show notes. Alright, first of all, let's start by defining the term intensity of effort. Intensity of effort basically means how hard are you training? And in the context of resistance training for strength or hypertrophy goals, your intensity of effort is your proximity to failure. Essentially, how many reps you have left in reserve before hitting the point where you can't complete another repetition with good form. Training within close proximity to failure is important for two reasons. First of all, the closer to failure you train, the more motor units you're going to be able to recruit. Motor units are comprised of a neuron and all of the muscle fibers within a muscle that neuron commands. Now, you don't recruit all of your motor units from rep number 1. You actually need to get really close to failure to recruit the most amount of them available. And quite intuitively, this is important because the more motor units you recruit, the more total area of the muscle you are training in that set. The second reason why getting close to failure in each set is important is that training within close proximity to failure generates enough mechanical tension to make sure that each individual muscle fiber involved within a set grows. Now, as I said in episode 7, and as Eric said in his own interview, you don't seem to need to train to complete failure on every single set. He suggested leaving 4 to 5 reps in reserve, meaning that you would stop a set when you think you could have done 4 or 5 more reps. Now, I would caveat that by saying that research also seems to show, and it's true in my experience as well, that when you're not very experienced with gauging how many reps you're leaving in reserve, it can be very difficult to gauge when you have 4 or 5 reps before failure. The closer to failure you get, the easier it becomes to understand that you're training hard. So if you're not already experienced with gauging your repetitions in reserve or with training in general, then I would normally recommend leaving a minimum of 3 repetitions in reserve. Now, you might be thinking, well, Nick, this is all well and good, but how do I know that I am getting close enough to failure to produce hypertrophy? My first recommendation here is that you need to train to actual muscular or technical failure at least every now and then, because if you've never ever achieved failure, you're not going to know what it feels like when you're leaving 2, 3, or 4 reps. if you don't know what it feels to achieve maximum effort, you're not going to be able to gauge relative effort. So on exercises that are safe, like machine-based exercises or isolation exercises, for example, for your arms, like a bicep curl, you can go to full failure. It's reasonably safe, and it's going to teach you what it feels like to get to maximum effort. My second recommendation is to pay attention to the speed of the concentric portion of each repetition. Now, a repetition is comprised of three main phases, to be precise. There's a concentric portion when you're lifting the weight. If you imagine doing a shoulder press, that's when you're pressing the weight up from the shoulder and you straighten your arm. Then there's an isometric phase, which is when you're holding the weight without moving. So in this particular case, you get to the top of the shoulder press and you stop for a second. And then there is an eccentric portion of the repetition, which is when you're lowering the weight and the muscle is lengthening. So in this case, you are lowering the weight when you're literally bringing the weight back down to the starting position level with your shoulder. The reason why I also mentioned that the muscle lengthens is that it doesn't always look like that. Like the eccentric phase doesn't always look like you're putting down the weight, and the concentric doesn't always look like you're lifting the weight. It's just to help you visualize it. What's valid across the board about the concentric and eccentric phase for all exercises is that on the concentric portion of the lift, the muscle is shortening, and then on the eccentric of the lift, the muscle is lengthening. So the fibers are stretching out when it's lengthening, and they are bulging and they're all bunched up together when the muscle is shortening. Now, you need to pay attention to the speed of the concentric, because the closer to failure you get, the more slowly you're going to keep lifting the weight on the concentric portion of the rep, even if you're trying to move the weight as fast as you possibly can. The closer to failure you are, the more as fast as you can becomes slow. This isn't something that you can do on purpose. It's a natural occurrence because your fibers are fatiguing, your muscle fibers, so they start contracting more and more, they start moving more slowly. In addition, as a fiber produces more force, it needs to contract more slowly. This is known as the force-velocity relationship. The more force a contraction is producing, the more slowly the muscle fibers involved in the contraction need to move. So, in general, in my experience, the first repetition that's visibly slower and feels slower than the previous ones, and you're starting to struggle to maintain good form, is a repetition that is usually between 5 and 3 reps away from failure. And I say it seems like 3 and 5 might be a bit of a large range, but that's because the way you fail and the way your concentrics slow down actually varies a little bit exercise to exercise. For example, on some exercises, you may find that your reps have a similar cadence until you only have 2 reps in reserve, and all of a sudden you are hitting the brakes and the reps are really, really grindy. And then there are other exercises instead where you're hitting 5 reps in reserve and you're already slowing down quite noticeably compared to the previous repetitions. However, in general, when you hit 5 to 3 repetitions in reserve, that's when you should be seeing, or in most cases, you might start seeing a slowdown in the speed at which your fibers are working. So essentially the speed of your movement is going to decrease. So that's how you know that you're getting closer to failure. The final topic I want to touch upon is how to track your proximity to failure from workout to workout. And to do this, I employ an evidence-based tool, which is known as the repetitions in reserve based rating of perceived exertion scale. In short, rating of perceived exertion is known as the acronym RPE. Now, the original RPE scale was devised by Gunnar Borg, and it's primarily used to rate how intensely you're performing physical work, and it works particularly well for endurance training, but doesn't apply quite as well to resistance training because that scale uses terms like hard, moderately hard, or super hard. And these terms are a bit too vague to apply to the concept of mechanical tension and proximity to failure that I've been talking about. For example, let's say that you're doing a set of 40 repetitions. Like Eric covered in his interview, 40 repetitions might be a bit too many to be able to gauge your intensity of effort very accurately, so that you don't know if you're actually failing, if your muscles are actually failing, or if maybe your cardiovascular system is excessively taxed. Either way, a set of 40 reps is going to leave you panting and in a pool of sweat. So you might rate that as extremely hard on the Borg RPE scale. However, you haven't actually achieved failure, and maybe you are leaving still reps in reserve, meaning that the set isn't even very effective for hypertrophy at all, despite the high RPE rating. So for this reason, the Borg RPE scale isn't the best when it comes to resistance training. The tool that I prefer to use is an RPE scale applied to resistance training, which is based on the number of repetitions that you believe you're leaving at the end of a set. And this RPE scale was devised by Mike Tuchscherer, who is a world record powerlifter and the owner of an online coaching company called Reactive Training Systems, or RTS. As I said, this scale is based on the number of repetitions that you believe that you have in reserve. And I say you believe because it is a subjective scale. It's called rating of perceived exertion. It's a scale from 0 to 10, where 10 means that you have no more reps left in reserve with good form. RPE 9 means that you end the set when you believe you have one more repetition in reserve with good form. RPE 8, you believe you have 2 repetitions in reserve. RPE 7, you believe you have 3 repetitions in reserve, all the way down to 0. In order to track your RPE from workout to workout, you would use this RPE scale and write down in your training log your perceived rating at the end of every set. For example, if you believe that the maximum repetitions you can do with 20 kilograms is 12, and you stop a set when you've done 9, 12 minus 9 equals 3. You have 3 repetitions in reserve, so you would rate this set an RPE of 7. Now, as I've said, the RPE scale is subjective, which is potentially its greatest limitation. And there has been research done on the validity of the RPE scale. And I mention it's evidence-based because the studies that have been conducted have concluded that the RPE scale is an effective method to rate your intensity of effort and make sure you're training hard enough to make hypertrophy gains. However, it doesn't mean that it's a perfect tool. And as I said, the subjectivity is its limitation. It's also a great strength because it's very easy to use. You don't need specialized equipment. Now, what science has shown is that you can also improve the accuracy of your ability to gauge your repetitions in reserve. It seems like once you've done at least one set, the more sets you do in the same workout with the same exercise, the easier it gets to rate your RPE. In addition, the more reps you do in a single set, the harder it gets to rate your RPE. So when you're doing 10 repetitions or less, that seems to be the easiest way to ensure a higher degree of accuracy. When you are a more experienced lifter and also more experienced using the RPE scale, you're going to be more accurate, which is intuitive. So, keeping these considerations in mind, I want to finish off the podcast by giving you my main suggestions on how to improve your accuracy when using the RPE scale, and therefore how to get better and better at gauging your proximity to failure over time. First of all, don't drive yourself crazy. This is a learning process. Using the RPE scale, training hard enough is a skill like any other. So don't expect to go into the gym after listening to this podcast, writing down your RPE ratings for every set and thinking, wow, I nailed all of them. No, it's going to seem confusing. It's going to take time, not just for one exercise, but for all of the exercises you're ever going to do. And every time you change exercises, you might need to relearn what failure and proximity to failure feels like for each new exercise. But just like if you had a music instructor, the music instructor wouldn't expect you to be able to play Mozart after your first lesson, so you shouldn't expect to be able to use the RPE perfectly after your first workout. So stick with it, and it will bear fruit. To this day, when I change exercises and I start doing one that I haven't practiced in a while, it takes me a couple of sessions to be able to gauge my RPE more accurately. And on many exercises, I had to spend many years to actually learn how to do it effectively. And I've been using the RPE scale for over 3 years at this point in my own training and in my coaching practice. My second recommendation, which I've already made, is to choose safe exercises every now and then where you can test what failure feels like. Not only to be able to gauge your relative effort to that max, to failure, but also so that if you've been using the RPE scale on one exercise, let's say the bicep curl, you've been doing bicep curls and rating your sets for 4 weeks. Now you have the last week before you want to deload, so taking some time off hard training to recover, and I'll cover deloads in a future episode. But for now, just know that it's the final week that you're going to train really hard before taking a little break. Okay, then you know you can push yourself to failure because you'll have time to recover afterwards. So you go to failure on the bicep curl here to then look back on your log and check how close to gauging your RPE correctly you came throughout the training cycle or mesocycle. So if in week 1 you did 10 reps and you rated the set at 7, and now with the same weight 4 weeks later you're doing 35 reps and that's your failure point, you know that you were training a little bit too easily in week 1. And that's not something to be ashamed of, or it's not something to be upset about. You haven't wasted the previous 4 weeks, not at all. You only waste weeks in terms of achieving hypertrophy if you don't train at all. You didn't waste those weeks, simply think of them as a learning experience. So now you know, after the deload, when you go back to hard training, you're going to have to push harder because what you thought was RPE 7 was actually much lower. My third suggestion is to film some of your sets and watch them back. I actually have my one-on-one coaching clients send me videos of their lifts pretty frequently. I don't only gauge and give feedback on their form, I also help them understand what to look out for when they are getting closer to failure. So if you have a coach, definitely send them your videos, but take them for yourself too, because I explained to you that when you're slowing down visibly and you're struggling to maintain good form, that's how you know that you're getting closer to failure. So if you watch your sets and you felt like you were definitely slowing down, but then in the footage it doesn't quite look like that, you know for next time that that perception you had was a little bit skewed, which is not uncommon because training is really hard. Training close to failure is really freaking hard. So your brain is going to push against that, and it's going to convince you that you have fewer reps in reserve before hitting failure than you actually do, because it also doesn't want you to die, and resistance training is a risk for the body, so the body's response is to try to get you out of the risky situation as soon as possible. So always watch your videos. Maybe don't take a video of every single set, because that's going to take you 5 hours to go through. But particularly if you're not super confident that you're gauging your intensity of effort correctly, film that exercise and watch it later and take some notes. My fourth and final suggestion, but not the least important, is to push harder than you think you have to. As I've mentioned throughout this episode, it's more common for people to underestimate how hard they're training than overestimate it. So if you're not completely sure that you're training hard enough, and if the exercise you're performing is safe, then challenge yourself to doing one extra rep when you think that you've already hit the proximity to failure that you wanted to hit. That is one piece of advice that I give all of my clients, especially the less experienced, using the RPE scale, and it always works wonders. And that's a wrap for today's podcast. My goal today was to give you very practical recommendations on how to make sure that you're training hard enough so that each individual set that you perform in a workout is going to be as effective as it can be for the goal of getting you jacked. As always, you're going to find a link to my website, to my Instagram account, and to the application form to become a one-on-one coaching client in the show notes. I am still taking on online coaching clients, so if you're thinking of taking your gains to the next level, maybe you want to gain more muscle or lose some body fat, or a combination of the two, and you don't quite know where to start, I may just be the perfect coach for you. So fill out the application form and we'll schedule a free video consultation to discuss your goals further. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.